Hi, I'm Brian Schroff from Beyondware. We've just released version 2.4 of Beyond Typicals. This update includes the much anticipated photo compositing feature, which allows you to import real-world photography as a backdrop to your Beyond Typicals models. We've also added some new camera controls and a few other features like some new bridge substructures. As always, there's plenty of new 3D assets and example projects, and I'll give you a tour of those as well. Let's dive in. The most exciting feature that we've added in Beyond Typicals version 2.4 is photo compositing. This tool is available to the Beyond Typicals Pro subscribers and allows you to import PNG or JPEG images into your Beyond Typicals models. You can get there from the rendering toolbar button on the right side of the window, which is this red circle button. Then go to the Photo Compositing tab at the top. This tool can be used in a variety of different ways, but the most exciting use is to add real-world photography behind a Beyond Typicals model. I won't go into too much detail on the tool here, as I've made a separate tutorial video on how to use this photo compositing feature. If you haven't seen it, you can get to it by clicking the Help button here at the top of the menu. This will take you to our website, which has additional information about the tool, including that tutorial video. Since this tool is simply a method of importing outside images into Beyond Typicals, you can also use it for adding company or project logos or watermarks to the model. We've preloaded Beyond Typicals with a couple of draft and preliminary watermarks for your use. You can simply choose one of these presets, click Create Preset, and then that image is populated in your image layer list for further editing, like opacity, XY offsets, scale, and occlusion distance, where we have these front and back shortcuts. Once an image is included in your layer list, you can rename it by clicking the pencil icon, hide or show it by clicking the eye icon, or delete it by clicking the trash icon. You can add up to 5 image layers in a BTIP file. We've added some new camera control settings in version 2.4. These tools will definitely help you line up your camera to an imported image when using the photo compositing tool, but they can help with other specific camera position needs as well. You can access these by clicking the Settings button in the lower left of the screen. These tools allow you to see and edit the X, Y, and Z coordinates of the camera, plus change the pitch or up-down angle and yaw or left-right angle of the camera. The camera distance setting zooms the camera in and out. To put it generically, the top line is the pan feature, or clicking and dragging the middle mouse wheel. The second line is the rotation you get by clicking and dragging the right mouse button. And the third line is the zoom you would get by scrolling your mouse wheel up and down. You can use these inputs to incrementally or specifically adjust the camera position and angle. Like other spin bars in Beyond Typicals, you can either click the arrows on the left and right to make incremental adjustments, or you can click and drag on the middle of the bar to change the value. Also, you can click the spin bar and type in a specific value. The copy and paste buttons can also be used to duplicate the camera position in other BTIP files. When I click Copy and open a different file, clicking Paste will take me to those same camera position settings I just copied. This stays on your computer clipboard, and I'll paste this into a notepad to show that this is copying a string of text, so you could share this with other Beyond Typicals users as well. This can be useful for duplicating a set camera position between multiple save files, where you can't do that with just the saved camera, which is stored in a single file. Being able to adjust the Z coordinate on your camera is also a new feature for your orbit camera modes, where previously we had no way to adjust the orbit height of that camera up or down. Now you can go to the Z coordinate and raise or lower that camera position while orbiting the model. We've also made a couple of minor feature improvements and bug fixes to version 2.4. I'll list a few of those off here. One is the vertical leader lines and horizontal leader lines are by default white in Beyond Typicals. We've now added some color control over those leaders. So you'll see here down at the bottom of the section label auto menu, we now have a leader line color section where I can change the color of those labels from white to something else. Here I'll show it as black. You'll see that there is a white leader line on the right side of this section. That's from the next lane. But generally, if you wanted to make a global leader line adjustment, you can change the color on one of your sections, save those settings as default, and then apply that default to all labels. You'll see that's turned on my horizontal leader line and changed all my vertical leader lines to black. Another improvement is pathway arrows. So previously we did not have a speed control over the arrows that were going down the length of the section. We've now linked up the speed of those arrows with a miles per hour or kilometers per hour speed so that you could set this to match the traffic on the lane or otherwise change it to something different. So we do have a speed control setting there now that wasn't in previous versions of Beyond Typicals. We've also added an improvement to the rendered output file naming convention, where in addition to including the file name in your image and video renders, it will also include the phase name as well. This should help you stay more organized and do less file renaming when you are trying to create images or videos of one file with many phases, like a set of alternatives or construction stages. Here I can just call this file name NYC, and when I render an image from here, you'll see that the file name includes NYC and the name of that phase that I rendered. So I'll open that folder and show you that we have Beyond Typicals underscore, then the file name, then another underscore, and then the phase name. As always, with this version update of Beyond Typicals, we've added some additional 3D assets. So I'll show you a tour of those. First, we've got some new pedestrian hybrid beacon or hawk signals. You'll see we've got a few different options here, one with yellow flashing lights, another with alternating red flashing lights, and then a version with those off. We also have empty mast arm and sign structure poles that can be used as building blocks in your model. They could serve as a starting point for rendering an image and possibly be added to with post-production, like photoshopping a specific sign or signal on top of these. We've also got some additional pavement building blocks. There are concrete and asphalt squares, as well as some arc pieces of those same pavement textures. These are meant to add in some flexibility and customization to your model in case you need to build in some additional concrete or asphalt connections within your typical section. We've also got some new vegetation, including some cherry blossom trees, both green and flowering. We basically have two different styles of tree with two options for color on each of those. We've also got a couple new sagebrush plants that go along with some of the other new desert type vegetation that was added in version 2.3, which include a couple different styles of cacti and some desert brush. We also have a new concrete barrier with a metal railing, which looks great on the bridge sections in Beyond Typicals. This can be inserted as a repeating primary or secondary asset on those bridge end sections to have as a decorative bridge facade and railing. The inspiration for this came from our user Vincent Caro, so thank you, Vincent. We also have some new pavement marking decals, including some new bike lane markings, which include some additional symbols, the word bike, and a green rectangle, which could be used repeating down the length of a section, or scaled up and placed underneath one of these other bike symbols like an embedded green marking. We've got a few other words on pavement, like bus, only, and yield. These will be much quicker than using one of my other striping tips, which was to use the custom label tool with a transparent background to put words on pavement. We've also got a new pedestrian decal, as well as some yield triangles, both closed and open options on those. We've added a couple of manhole assets. One of these I'm using in a new example project, which I'll go over later. You'll see as I bring these in that when you place them, the lid is just over the pavement surface and the rest is underneath the roadway section. We've got a closed version and an open version. You'll see that these do have some openings, and keep in mind you could combine this with some underground pipes to show utilities running through the manhole. Again, something you'll see in the residential street utilities example project later in this video. We've also got some new static vehicles to show a wider variety of transportation methods. That includes a Cessna type airplane, in addition to a couple of different emergency vehicles. There is a fire truck and an ambulance. And we also have a couple of different style of boats in case you have water in your typical section scene. We've also added a couple of buildings. We have a red barn and a small airport hangar. We also have some new 3D assets for active transportation users. You'll see that we have a person on a bike, which randomizes as you place it. We have this option that appears as if they are moving, and we have a random assortment of people on bikes that look like they are stopped. There's also a static child cyclist as an option, as well as an assortment of just bikes, which can look great in a bike share station or bike rack. We've also got static assets of someone pushing a wheelchair, a person on crutches, a person in an electric wheelchair, a person using a walker, a couple options of people pushing strollers, and a static person on a scooter as well. All of these add some more flexibility for people and active transportation in your image renderings. We've also added a section of empty pipe to give the user some additional flexibility on placing pipes underground and possibly adding some rotation, like slope to those pipes. Whereas our current underground pipe menu really only has options for scaling and moving those pipes, and the only rotation axis is the z-axis. So if you did need to bring in a pipe to your model with some slope on it, you can use this placed asset to do that instead. Finally, for our new assets, we have some median barriers. Thanks to Zane Pratt at David Evans, who had previously contributed some of our MSE wall sections, which you can see toward the bottom of the section menu. You can see the David Evans and Associates logo on those. Zane was also kind enough to provide us with some concrete barrier median options, which look great in the middle of a section around bridge piers. I've used one of these in our new example projects, which I'll talk about later in this video. And moving on from placed assets, but not from Zane at David Evans, I did want to add that Zane was kind enough to provide us with some additional substructure elements to our bridge sections as well. So I can toggle on those and show you that we have down here in our substructure list a few new bridge piers courtesy of Zane and David Evans and Associates. Those are named here at DEA Bridge Pier 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you'll see that those are some new options here for some built-in piers and pier caps to make your substructure elements a lot easier to bring in all at once. So thanks again, Zane. We have 12 new example projects in Beyond Typicals 2.4, so I'll take a few minutes on each of those and kind of walk through some of the highlights as to why we're putting this in example project and maybe some of the special features in each of these. This is our small downtown reconstruct project. This is very similar to several projects I've worked on in my career, where you have a smaller downtown, maybe an aging city, where there is some desire to reconfigure a roadway while you're repairing some of the underground utilities. So that's something I wanted to capture here. You'll see I'm using some one-story buildings. I've got angled parking. I've also put in some of our pavement decals where you can show cracking and other imperfections on that pavement. So I've added those to the surface there. Moving through the construction staging, I want to show that I've got trenching, I'm labeling a work zone, I've got barriers while still maintaining some traffic, while we're also rebuilding this water main. So you'll see I've changed this watercolor to gray. I'm using custom labeling down here, And then I've got a pipe here to show construction of the new water main. And then something that's usually important with these types of projects are what's being maintained during construction, particularly from the business owner's point of view, where they may live and die during these construction periods based on the type of traffic restriction that might happen during construction. So, because there are generally some trade offs during construction and some negotiations with those business owners about what's best for them, I did put in a couple of different options. One of those being here where maybe there's a desire to keep some on street parking. And in that case, maybe it's just one-way traffic during that water main replacement. And then also showing an option where maybe the two-way traffic is more important. And in that case, we would remove the street parking. One thing I really wanted to highlight in this project is something that's important as well is maintaining pedestrian traffic. So you'll see as I walk through this phasing, I'm making sure that the pedestrians do have a place to walk. This is very common in these kinds of designs for construction staging. So it's something I also wanted to show with Beyond Typicals, particularly here, something with like a sidewalk ramp and maybe a temporary wood bridge over sidewalk replacement to get people to those business frontages. This is particularly a bit of a Beyond Typicals hack where I've taken pieces of fence and turned them on their side and laid them on top of one another to look like a wood bridge over the top of that sidewalk demolition area. So again, in this phase, you'll see I've built up an asphalt base and the future curbs and gutter. You'll notice there's some elevation differences there. I've used some earth layers and transparency in some of these sections. If you dive into the advanced texturing, you'll be able to see kind of how I pieced this together so that I do have pedestrians walking on what looks to be at the asphalt base of a roadway section. And then again, advancing through those options, we get to that stage where, again, we could discuss either maintaining on-street parking with one-way traffic or putting in two-way traffic without parking. And then getting to the final improvement, you'll see I've basically rebuilt the sidewalks, put in some decorative paving, and straightened out that parking to basically widen out the sidewalk and amenity space outside the new curb and gutter. One thing I want to highlight here in this section is these planters that look like in-ground planters are actually just a stretched out and lowered plant pot. So if I pull this section up, I'll pull it forward so you can see it. It is just a lowered, so I've lowered my vertical offset, and then I've stretched out in the X direction and shrunk in the Z direction, basically just our original potted plant to put that below the planters here to show kind of an in-ground planter. One of the other things I want to note here is in all of these stages, I do have pipes and labels in a consistent spot. I've intentionally used our free pipe section to be able to place these pipes because as I walk through construction staging, some of these lanes may get deleted, some of them may get widened or narrowed, and in that case, if I had underground pipes tied directly to one of these sections, they may either disappear or get shifted out of place. So by using free pipe and putting it off to the side, I'm able to leave those three pipes in a consistent X offset to the right from that point in the typical section. And that way, when I duplicate and make changes to other parts of the road, for instance, I'll just widen this one out a little bit. You'll see that those relatively stay in the consistent spot on the outside of the sidewalk section here. Along with that note, I've done the same with the custom labels because, again, these are in a relative position. I added a custom label over on this left side. So you'll see when I select the buildings on the left, I get my buttons to see and edit those custom labels. Again, trying to keep those in a relatively similar condition because if I put that custom label on top of, let's say, angled parking and then deleted angled parking for a future phase, that label would disappear. So just putting those in a consistent space from the get-go will let you duplicate your phase and make edits to the internal sections without losing the work to get those into place. This is the shared street example project. I wanted to make something like this because of some commercial corridors that I know of. These could also be called of shared spaces or WUNRFs, where basically they're deprioritizing this area for vehicles so that it is more of a shared space for all modes of traffic. And by design, like using visual cues for different paving types and removing barrier curbs through here, you're able to design a comfortable environment that will encourage cars to move very slowly and be able to share common space with people walking, people jogging, scooters and cyclists, etc., all moving through this area at the same time. So the one thing I really wanted to highlight with this project was I'm using a sidewalk section here to show multiple different types of moving traffic through here. And the way I've done that is instead of having my walking pedestrian asset controlling the traffic, I've toggled on use global traffic in this section. And then I've changed the speed upward, you'll see, to 15 kilometers per hour. And by doing that, using global traffic, I'm now accessing the full moving traffic library of Beyond Typicals. So I can toggle on certain cars, scooters and sport bikes, cyclists and joggers. And by setting that speed to a consistent 15 kilometers per hour, I'm able to get that slow moving traffic through here that looks realistic when a car drives in here as well as a jogger. If I did turn on the walking pedestrian, they would look a little funny just with the animation of a person walking at a speed of 15 kilometers per hour. So that's why I've left the walking pedestrians out of this asset and pushed those off to the side, both on the sidewalk next to these buildings, as well as some of that brick paving here. And that brick paving there is just some concrete paver textures that I've added some brown hue to. And then you'll see I've placed a few other assets through here, some of our newer ones like a static bike in a bike parking area, as well as tables and chairs and bollards and trees. So really cool street. I like to see these pop up in commercial areas just because they are encouraging some of that modal hierarchy of prioritizing pedestrian safety over vehicular access. Here's the multimodal conversion example project. I put this one together to show the conversion of a 4-lane road with on-street parking to something that is supportive of new bike facilities and bus-only lanes. And what I wanted to do with the phasing here was to show how a base design might differ in a corridor like this at a bus stop or at a left turn lane, where your general design isn't necessarily changing. We're not evaluating alternatives or showing construction staging, but in certain areas where you might need to widen out the road for a turn lane or to accommodate a bus shelter and platform, how the rest of that roadway might need to change outside of that base design. So here I've got just in existing conditions. You'll see I'm using generic white buildings on the outside. I've also moved my labels to the front and down. This is a very popular way to label these typical sections. And then I've also got our width bound label, but I've added that up here with an override text to show a right of way width instead of a width bound. And you'll see I'm also hiding the visualizer because I really just want to use that to show the 88 feet between the building faces here. So moving into the base design, you'll see a couple of other new things. We've got some new pavement marking decals that includes a few different words on pavement. So I'm using the bus and only words and placing those in the bus lane. And then you'll also see, this is something I've posted on LinkedIn in our user group, that if you do need to label a important but narrow section, instead of using the auto labels, you can turn the auto label off and just add in a custom label that looks a lot like this. With this custom label, you'll see I'm matching the same label style with that gray background and the same white text and font, but it's basically just a custom label here that I've turned on its side, and I've scaled down to a smaller scale to squeeze it between that area of the face of curb and the edge of the bikeway. You'll also see here that I've done some other custom labeling as well. So you'll see while I've got this bus lane here and I've labeled it 12 feet, it's actually an 11-foot wide lane where I have 1 foot of the curb and gutter, which in this case, we're trying to measure that full width to the face of curb. By doing that, it's as simple as turning off the labels for the curb and gutter and taking the bus lane label and overriding the dimension. You'll see I've pushed it to the left a little bit just to center it over the full 12 feet instead of just that 11-foot section. And then I've also, since I've needed to remove the vertical leader lines on some of these elements, I've used a tip that I've shown in some other instances where you can get rid of your vertical leader lines, but also put in a 0-foot wide invisible section. And I've done that here a few times. And with that 0-foot wide invisible section, you can turn that vertical leader line off and basically place a single white stem between any of the section elements here. It's a really nice way when you're trying to fine tune your section labels. Maybe there's a certain combination of sections where you want to see those all measured differently. You have those label overrides and invisible sections to put in stems and custom labels using those auto labels as well. This is the curb bump out project. I wanted to make this one just to show off some of the assets and again using our stopping features here. This curb bump out asset, it's actually called sidewalk ramp end. We've got a few different styles of these. These got snuck in at the end of the version 2.3 update. You'll see we've got a couple of different options, basically one for the left and one for the right side. And then those have options of having grass texture around the sidewalk ramp versus a concrete option. You'll also notice that I placed ADA tiles on top of this bump out. So again, that's pulling in an asset and basically setting it down on that placeholder in that asset for a little added realism of that asset. The other thing I'll point out is we've got a grass parkway here. This required putting in a sidewalk standard to show the connection between the sidewalk ramp within this bump out asset and the longitudinal sidewalk as well. So I did that on both sides. I've also put in one of our new ADA pedestrian assets. So we've got a man in a electric wheelchair. I've also placed a stop sign and placed some decals on the pavement to show crosswalk markings and a stop bar. And then you'll see I've got those cars in that lane coming to a stop by using our advanced traffic. So under the traffic of that lane, I've toggled on use stop bar. And then in our settings, I've got intersection timings. You'll see I've got a very short stage 1. That's basically just the green light. When that stage is active, the stopped vehicle will start again. We'll see that in just a second. And then over the remaining 12 seconds of that cycle, there's basically a stop sign that comes up. I can turn that visualizer on so that you can see those timings in effect. This is the stalled vehicle lane clearance example project. This is one, again, I've encountered in my career where on certain roads with a desire for maybe a barrier median, that there is probably a minimum physical clearance you would want to consider and provide in the case that there could be a stalled vehicle on that section with barriers on both sides, so that in a case of an emergency vehicle, there would be the physical width for those vehicles to clear that stalled vehicle and continue on down the road. You'll see here I've paused, actually turned off moving traffic because I've added some static assets. including the ambulance, which we have as a new asset in version 2.4. I've also put in some shared lane markings. So again, we've got some new decals that you can put onto the road. So that includes the green box plus the Sharrow as a placeable asset. And then you'll also see I've got some placed vehicles, as well as a stationary cyclist and a person pushing a stroller. The last thing I'll note here is just I've got a custom label here to indicate that stalled vehicle. And then these lanes here in the middle, you'll see that I'm using a label text override that's multi-line. So I can label single lane curb to curb minimum on top of the automatic width label of, in this case, 18 feet. Because again, similar to the multimodal conversion example project, I've got a gutter where I want that 18-foot width dimension that I'm trying to highlight to include the width of that gutter. So in this case, again, I'm using an invisible section that's 0 feet wide to place between the gutter and the curb face, and then turning off that label and turning off the label stems of this single lane label and overriding it and shifting it over so that it sits over the full width of the curb to curb face there. This is our residential street utilities project. I otherwise might refer to this as fun with placed assets and custom labels because there's quite a few in this example project, and you can see those as you start navigating through some of the sections. But really what I was trying to do here was use Beyond Typicals to mimic an exhibit that I've seen quite often in my career, where a government administration might want to educate the general public on what's underneath the street to kind of show them elements of the public infrastructure that they might not consider on a day-to-day basis and definitely don't see on a day-to-day basis, including things like public utilities like water main and sewer mains, as well as private utilities like your electric, cable, and gas. You'll see here there are plenty of custom labels to indicate things like fire hydrants and valve boxes and sewers, but I've also got plenty of placed assets here up front. One of the big ones that is new to 2.4 is this empty pipe, whereas our previous underground pipes, like our sewer mains here, are limited to basically non-sloping orientation where you can rotate it, but just on the Z-axis. Now by adding an empty pipe, we're able to place it as an asset, scale it up as we need to, both in its circumference and its length, and then add some rotation to it. So you can show a drainage inlet draining into a stormwater manhole, or you could turn it on its end and go straight up to show something like a valve box or a connection to a fire hydrant. So I really wanted to highlight some of those features as well as the new stormwater manhole. Plus we've got some decals like the drainage grates and manhole lids over the top of those elements up here at the front. This drainage inlet is actually a plant pot asset. This is one that I've used quite often, where I basically found a nice concrete rectangle and rotated it upside down. You'll see as I start scaling this back to its original size that it is just a potted plant, but I've used this enough because if it's concrete nature and it's just a simple rectangle, where if you do flip it upside down, you can use it for other purposes like a drainage inlet or maybe a foundation for a light pole or a mast arm mounted sign pole. So I've used that in a couple different example projects in those cases as well. And then behind all of that information in the front, I just wanted to make an attractive backdrop for the residential nature of the street. So you'll see I've got some of our newer single family home assets. And then I've also taken a little bit of time to add in concrete elements like connecting the stoops to the sidewalk or building out the driveways from garage to roadway as well. Placing those things like vegetation are really easy to do, so it doesn't add too much effort to create kind of that natural, realistic, and beautiful backdrop to your exhibits as well. Here is the trail crossing example project. I wanted to use this one to show off some of our new 3D assets, primarily those being static people on bikes, where we have an adult and a child version, as well as our new hawk signals. So we do have a few different hawk signals, some with yellow flashing lights, others with red flashers, and then we have an off version as well. So I just wanted to create an example project to show off some of those features. I also did have a recent tutorial video on how to create a shared use path. So I kind of implemented those same elements here where I've used a bike lane and duplicated it several times in order to create a pathway that's labeled as a single path. You'll see I've also placed some of our new pavement marking decals to show that shared use nature of it, and also using different types of moving traffic at different speeds, like joggers, cyclists, scooters, and walking pedestrians, to really nail down that shared use nature of the path. And then you'll see I'm also using our new asphalt building block pieces. So I've got square and arc pieces of the asphalt pavement to show the horizontal orientation of that pedestrian crossing. This is the Rural Bioswale example project. I wanted to make this one primarily to highlight the ability to use a few different characteristics and beyond typicals to create a bioswale, and then using the remainder of the backdrop to show off some more of our new assets. You'll see here I've got our hangar and our small airplane, which could be used and extrapolated maybe to some type of airport type project in the future. And then over here also we've got our new 3D barn asset on the right side, and separating those uses with some of our different styles of fencing. But really on these bioswales, the thing I wanted to highlight was the composition of both the slope as well as what's in those bioswales. So I'll show that it's basically just a fill slope, a flat bottom, and a fill slope combined with a water plane that sits there in the top. That water plane's a little bit hard to see just with that vegetation that's there. But really what I wanted to highlight here was this ryegrass, when stretched out really large, can look really nicely like native overgrowth. And when you do that, you can really increase the spacing on those elements because spreading that ryegrass out is going to make your frame rate perform a lot better. Naturally, when you bring a lot of that ryegrass into your typical section model, there's a lot of polygons in it and it can slow down the visualization. But by increasing the scale of that ryegrass, you'll see mine's up to about a factor of 8. You can also increase the spacing between them, and that just has a lot fewer ryegrass elements in your section, which will perform a lot better. So just taking that ryegrass, again, increasing the X and Y scale. I left the Z scale at 1. I can show you what that looks like without those scaled. So basically the natural size of that ryegrass is quite small. And just by bringing that out to very large sizes, you can create kind of a natural growth type look on that grass, which can look nice as a bioswale. So you can play with vertical offset if you wanted to see those buried a little bit more below water. Those are all features that you can do with the primary and secondary asset controls. Then you'll see all these placed assets here. These are effectively two different kinds of flowers, just placed quite a few times. This is one of those instances where our legacy method of placing assets is going to work a lot faster than the new drag and drop method, where if I found the flower here, if I drag and drop, 20 of these, that could take a lot of time by pulling in this crown beard. Otherwise, what you can do is make sure that that asset is in the placement mode. So if you select a section, go to asset placement and turn on placement mode, as long as it's populated in this list, which I've done here. So flower crown beard is now placeable. Now I can just click a lot and place those down and get those in rather quickly. So it's nice if you're looking at another option for maybe some randomly assorted vegetation elements that pop up a lot. That could be a nice way to do it other than clicking and dragging those elements in one at a time. This is the highway median barrier example project. We put this one together to show that there is the possibility to show things like overpasses on your typical section, but that does require importing assets. In this particular project, it comes with an imported asset here of this bridge type, where you can see it's been brought in and placed on the central median here, and that is effectively just its own 3D asset piece, which we've centered on the typical section. On top of that, you can see I have placed some static vehicles where they have been moved up and aligned to those lanes on that overpass. Again, the import asset tool is great for things like this, but it is in beta. We are aware that not all 3D assets are importing consistently, but we do encourage you, if you do have SketchUp or Blender or elements to create FBX and OBJ objects, that you can try to bring them into your model to do some more advanced things like this bridge overpass. The other thing I want to highlight here is a couple more assets where we've placed some construction barriers in the foreground and background around an asset provided by Zane Pratt from David Evans and Associates. So thanks to Zane and DEA, and you can search for those assets in the asset bar. We've got a few different concrete canoe type concrete barriers that can be placed in the median of a roadway around a bridge support, that like the one that is shown in the bottom of this imported bridge. So thanks a lot, Zane. These are great additions to Beyond Typicals. This is the street level photo composite example project, which I'm sure looks very familiar to our followers and users of Beyond Typicals, as this is the one that we primarily have been using in some of our early marketing materials and training materials for how to photo composite. Overall, this is a very simple example project. It just has an existing condition model, which was used to match building face to building face widths on the road and line up the camera, and then a proposed road diet condition as well, with on-street parking and some new amenity zones with palm trees and benches and some planters. I'll also remind you, in the saved cameras, we have the composite camera, which can be reloaded to match up the view with the Beyond Typicals model. And then also in our photo compositing area, we have that ground level photo, which you can turn on and off and make other adjustments to, like opacity and occlusion distance. This is the Desert Widening composite project. This is yet another example of using photo compositing, this time with a bit of a different aspect ratio and environment to show off the flexibility that photo composite can allow, where this is more than just an urban complete street type of tool. You can also capture things like construction staging and other environments than an urban setting. In this one, you'll see we've got our existing conditions with a side slope, and then we're showing construction staging with some reduced lane widths, a temporary barrier, and our area highlights over some fresh asphalt on the right. And then we've also got another stage widening to the west using some of that new pavement, again with temporary barriers and area highlights, and then a final improvement basically showing widening that roadway in the desert from a 2-lane road to a 4-lane road. What you do kind of miss out on this, just given the angle and the perspective of the photo composite, is the wider side slopes over here on the left. So you'll see we do have the side slope to go down and match existing, but when loading that camera, you can just see that those do get cut off. Just something to consider as you capture your photography. If there are elements on the outside of the road, then maybe a more elevated view, maybe from a drone or some kind of elevated viewpoint, would be better for that type of photo composite. So again, we have a photo composite tutorial. The first step of that process is to getting the right photo. So again, this is just something to consider as you work on your photo compositing. And finally, this is our urban bikeway option composite project. This one really resonates with me as a former complete streets designer and project manager, where I've had plenty of projects where we're trying to implement new and protected bikeways into streets that might have been overbuilt to begin with. And in this urban setting, it's just a great example as using the photo compositing tool to bring that real world backdrop to some options that you want to talk through with stakeholders and decision makers, so that you can find the optimal solution for that roadway. So, on this project specifically, we've got an existing condition model. Even by recreating the existing conditions, you can see there's plenty of extra roadway pavement. And what I'll do is bring our image to the front so that you can see that as well. This actually is our edited image. So you would see in the photo composite tutorial that there are some tools out there with magic erasers. Ultimately, what I was trying to do with this edited backdrop version is to clear out some of the vertical elements along the sidewalk. You'll see it's not perfect, but as a backdrop to Beyond Typicals, it works pretty well. I'll turn that off and turn on the actual image and bring that to the front as well. So even there, you can see plenty of extra roadway pavement. We've got parked cars on both sides and plenty of width between those for a single lane of traffic. So in those instances, those roads are ripe for converting and reprioritizing that space, and allocating things like a new bikeway, whether it's one way or two way. We've got several different options posed here, one with front end angled parking and back end angled parking, in addition to maintaining parking on both sides. So a really good project, a really great example for how photo compositing can be used when you're talking about this type of a project and an improvement to a roadway, and be able to show the real world conditions surrounding it. I think this is a really good example for what Beyond Typicals can do. That concludes all the new features, assets, and example projects in version 2.4 of Beyond Typicals. Be sure to download the latest patch either through the Epic Games Launcher or getting the new zipped folder from beyondware.com/download. If you haven't seen it yet, check out the photo compositing tutorial video for our pro users to help guide you through your own photo composites on your projects. I'm excited to see what you can create. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to me via email at brian@beyondware.com. Thanks for watching.